Okay, GoPro. All right, there we are. Good.
Yeah.
I'm in Nepal. I'm at base camp. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nepal is the garden of temples. Nepal is the birthplace of Gautam Buddha. Yes, Nepal is the kingdom of Himalayas. Of course, we are at the Mount Everest base camp. First of all, I would like to do welcome to Nepal. Welcome to Mount Everest base camp. And I warmly welcome to you all, esteemed ones. Thank you so much for being here. Today is 29th of May 2022. Of course, we do have an international project, World's Highest Climate Summit 2022, including the Everest Address on Climate and Wildlife. We have already completed 3 more international projects. That was for the promotion of Nepal, tourism, and typical Nepali culture. And now this is 4th program we are here going to organize, Campaign to Change the World. In one sentence, this is our mission and this is our goal. There are more than 66% people are working in the field as a farmer. The voice is for them. More than 5,000 mammals are in the earth. The voice is for them because we are talking about the climate change. There are more than 8,000 species bird in the earth. The voice, this program is for them. And of course, we do know there are 8 billion people in the world. The voice is for them. That's why the World Record Holder Society and team, we are going to organize this project. This is not only for us. This is not only for the country. Of course, the sounds, the voice is for the world.
Good morning and namaste. I'm Shanon host for this program. I'll try my best to guide you all through this program. We'll be having presentations and panel discussions at the highest place on the earth. Climate change is most talked topics nowadays, with many solutions being put forth and argued over. I would like to introduce Joel Berger. Joel Berger is a professor and chair of wildlife conservation at the Colorado State University. He is also a senior scientist at the Wildlife Conservation Society. Dr. Berger has conducted research on diverse animal species from deserts to ice fields across 4 continents. I would like to hand over this microphone to Dr. Joel Berger for speech as well as presentations.
Namaste.
Namaste.
What an honor to be here in Nepal as a guest of the World Record Holder Society, as a guest of the Nepalese Mountaineering Association, as a guest of the Ministry of the Environment. I feel very privileged to be here. Last week, we met as a team with the Honorable Vice President Nanda Bahadur Poon, and he reaffirmed the importance of understanding climate and its impact not only here in Nepal, but to all people, and to how to try to move ahead with communication and to help move a message from countries like Nepal to the industrialized nations of the world that are helping to fuel some of the disastrous effects of wildlife. 20 years ago, Nelson Mandela, then the president of South Africa, also talked about the protection of biodiversity and ecosystems for humanity. I'm especially humbled to be here for the inaugural Everest address on climate and wildlife. Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary were, of course, the first to summit this day 69 years ago. It's also been 75 years since Nepal and the United States initiated diplomatic ties, relationships that still continue today under the challenges that we all experience in this world of change. There is great and undaunting interest in peace, cooperation, and subsistence on planet Earth. Climate is only one of two of the most serious factors affecting how we sustain life on this planet. Edmund Hillary had a fascination with mountains, such as those all around us, and Mount Everest just off of my right shoulder. He not only brought attention to adventure and feats, but he contributed to humanity, especially here in Nepal with his contributions at many, many levels. But, and here's what's really interesting, Edmund Hillary also was interested in biodiversity and animals. In 1960, he, with two animal biologists, organized an expedition to discover undiscovered species. In his words, he said, and so I'm quoting what he had written, "The world revels in mysteries. In 1960, I took an expedition to try to understand this, in other words, those mysteries with biology." And he traveled with two biologists. Hillary understood that animals are part of our existence, part of ecosystem health, part of what makes us humans, because we as humans, if we go back in time, have always worked, needed, loved, and eaten and subsisted off of animals. Today, animals everywhere are under assault, but we still relish animals and celebrate animals. From species like the Danfi, or the Manal, Nepal's national bird, which is one of the most beautiful pheasant species on the planet. In a couple of minutes, Dr. Lambert will talk a little bit more about ecological or ecosystem services, and I will pause now until I give another presentation with some slides. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel Berger. Now I would like to present Dr. Joanna Lambert. She is a professor in the program of Environmental Studies and faculty in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado at the Boulder. She is also the direction the Humans and Wildlife Animals Laboratory. Dr. Lambert has conducted research on wild animals in remote regions of Africa, Asia, South America, and North America. The stage is yours.
Namaste. Good morning, Nepal. Good morning, world. What a pleasure and honor it is to be here on the top of Mother Earth, on the roof of the world. We're doing this in honor of the 75th anniversary of diplomatic ties between our two nations. We're also doing this in honor of the very summit of this incredible mountain behind us. This is the 69th anniversary, of course, of the summit, of the world-famous summit of Mount Everest, Sagarmatha, behind us. I am absolutely humbled by the majesty of this landscape. And I am humbled by the welcome that I have received since arriving to this great nation. This remarkable expedition didn't happen by chance. This remarkable expedition is happening because of the efforts, the vision, the hard work of these men with whom I sit. And also the U.S. coordinator, of course, Shanon Pheleps, who we wish were here, but he is not. But I thank you, all of my colleagues, Rai, Purna Rai, Bahadur Rai, Bahadur, all the others, Saran, Searing, Mrigan. Thank you all for this incredible experience here. I'd also like to thank the Nepalese Mountaineering Association and the Ministry of Forests and the Environment for their support, and also the Honorable Vice President of Nepal for his blessings. I cannot think of a better place on planet Earth to be giving such an address. Myself and my colleague, Dr. Berger, will be providing for you today the inaugural address on climate and wildlife, and we'll be doing this as part of this historical moment in our history of the world's highest climate summit, and I cannot think of a better place to be doing this. All night, we heard the sound of rock falling. All night we heard the sound of the Great Kumbh Glacier calving, of eroding away because of the heat on this earth, right? We are here because we as humanity are confronting the greatest challenge that we have ever faced. We need to call this challenge out high and wide, and we are doing that here at almost 18,000 feet in U.S. terms, over 5,000 meters, of course, in Nepalese terms. So it is very somber, right? This is a great challenge, but there is hope. There is hope. As I walked up here along with my colleagues, I was watching the birds. There are bird species that have adapted to this warmth and this warming environment. As we have sat here, butterflies have landed. They still persist. The yellow-billed choughs, the birds are all around. They are blessing what we are doing today. And in my presentation that I'll be giving in a few minutes, I will be talking about both the somber parts of climate, but also the hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joanna E.Lambert, for your beautiful speech as well as presentation. Just I have seen the camping to change the world. I think to change the world, first of all, we should have to change ourselves. Let's change ourselves to change the world.
This is wonderful, being here at the top of the world, being with colleagues, being with friends, and communicating the critical message of our time, that as we continue to warm the planet, there are consequences, and we need to do better. But what I want to do today is to talk about the challenge to some of the special animals that help create us, that help make us human, but also for those species themselves, because they help support how we live here on this planet that we all share. Warming and melting is everywhere. We know that. We know that from the shores of Bangladesh, where the waters rise. We know from the highest mountains where the glaciers recede. Animals are under assault everywhere. But it's just not animals, because we are part of the planet with animals, and what happens to animals also happens to us. Wherever we look, we see the same patterns. We know that there have been unprecedented heat waves in India and Pakistan, and these are putting more than 1 billion lives at risk. We know that the water towers of the world are here in Asia. In fact, in these very regions. And these water towers bring life to more than 2 billion people, to almost a quarter of the world's population who rely on these glaciers that recede. We know that the North Indian heat wave hits and affects Nepal. And we see that this year, where the monsoons have come far earlier. So even here at base camp, and trekking 6 days to get here, as Professor Lambert and I have done with this wonderful team from the World Record Holder Society, it's been a bit of a slog, an uphill slog, meaning that things are different now than they have been in the past when people come to Everest Base Camp. It's not only here, but when we look across the planet, we see the same patterns. Russia, even in Moscow, in March, people are sunbathing because times have changed. There are mudslides in Bhutan, avalanches. As we interrupted this program because there was an avalanche and rocks and snow were raining down about 2 kilometers from us. Things are changing. Not only mudslides, not only avalanches, but tsunamis, fire, drought. There's the forming of rapid glacial lakes. These lakes form, these lakes burst, there are floods downstream that kill people, that destroy crops, that destroy fields. Flooding occurs in so many parts of this realm of the world. It's not just only here or in Russia or in Europe or in the US, but even in Africa, we see major changes in the weather that result from climate change. Mozambique, for instance, has had unprecedented flooding that has changed the face of how farmers live and how they deal with wildlife that rely on a little bit more stable climate. In places like Namibia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Tanzania, there are droughts. This brings elephants and rhinos in competition. It brings other species in competition for water. And so it's not just climate and humans, but it's some of these animals that have big and important impacts on the ecosystem. The global challenges are not just Nepal, of course, and as I said, not just the US, but everywhere, with CO2 continuing to cause major problems in the atmosphere. But it's not just climate change, even though we're here at the world's highest climate summit. There are human footprints as humanity expands and takes more and more land, which we understand because we all want good, high-quality lifestyles. But somewhere we have to come with the reckoning that the planet is limited in its resources and what it can provide. When we look across, we'll just say the Himalayan Tibetan region, of the 800 glaciers that have been measured, more than 90% are either receding, such as we see in the backdrop here, the Kumbha Glacier, or they're thinning, and then they will recede. More than 90% of the 800 glaciers in this area of Asia. Species everywhere are challenged, especially those in the cold. So we know that some low elevation species, such as tigers, maybe some ibex, they're doing okay in the warm, but as the temperatures change and it becomes warmer up top, species that are important, such as blue sheep, are to snow leopards, they may have issues. Snow leopards may have issues with the warming temperatures. There is no more up. Species can't go higher once they reach the point after the glaciers are gone. There are no other options. Think of tar, such as we have here in Nepal. As they go to higher and higher places, they all of a sudden may be limited. There are species in our heart and species in our history. Those at high latitudes, such as in the Arctic, are challenged. Biodiversity at high elevations are a challenge. Polar bears are a challenge because they need sea ice to hunt. When the sea ice is gone, they have no more opportunities to hunt seals. Snow patches are declining. If we go just north 2 kilometers from here into Tibet, we find wild yaks, we find other species. In the winter, they need snow patches. Snow patches are important because the mothers are lactating, producing milk for their offspring. They rely on snow patches for water, which they convert to milk. But when the snow patches are gone, they lose thousands and thousands of kilometers of habitat. Just north of here, these are some of the discoveries that my research team and I have made. Nepal has had a long history between people and wildlife. We can find on rock carvings in the Dalpo area, in the Mustang area. We find people in rock carvings, art. We find animals in there. Sometimes in other parts of the world, we find spears, we find arrows. And we know that people have relied on wildlife. It's part of their heritage. It's part of our heritage. But we also know species need cold. They need to live in the shadow of glaciers, such as I have behind me, such as it behind me, or in front of me as I look to the north, onto the Tibetan Plateau and other realms. When we lose that cold, some species cannot adapt, and so they disappear. Wild yaks are a really interesting case. A lot of the products that are here have come up from domestic yaks. But wild yaks also have a legacy here in Nepal. They have been rediscovered here in Nepal in recent years. They are on the stamps, and especially on the currency of money, on rupees, we have wild yaks. We also have other species, though, that may not be coming into this area that are more challenged. Species like snow leopards, which rely on blue sheep, which are not in this area, but to the west and to the east here in Nepal. And one of my colleagues from the Wildlife Conservation Society first came to Nepal in the 1970s. He and then a colleague named Peter Matheson wrote a book, a very famous book called The Snow Leopard, which featured George Schaller, who had the first photo of a wild snow leopard. And this species has become iconic throughout these regions of Asia, a target for conservation, because they symbolize what it means for healthy ecosystems and for species in our hearts. Our parents once knew what the world looked like 50 years ago, 75, grandparents 100, 150 years ago. But we don't have those memories as vivid anymore because the world, of course, is changing. And so in trying to sum up, I want to make 3 points, and I will look at my notes. The first is that we're all in this together, whether Nepali or American, big country or small. Environmental justice needs to be spread evenly across all countries. We can't just have the big industrial countries making the problem and letting the smaller countries reap the negative consequences of what big industry is doing. Animals are in our soul and in our past, as I have said. They need to be in our future. What good does it do to have our grandfathers say, I used to see snow leopards, and then our sons and our daughters will say, well, we don't know that they exist anymore. What good does that do? Animals give us hope. Once we've lost them, we've lost ourselves. I'm very grateful and honored to be here. Again, many, many thank yous.
Thank you, Joel Berger, for your wonderful presentation. Now I would like to hand over this mic for Joanna E.Lambert for the presentation.
Thank you very much. I feel so blessed to be here. In a million years, I didn't think I'd be doing something such as this. Again, thank you so much. I truly feel blessed to be here, and as I have said multiple times on this great expedition, in a million years I didn't think I'd be doing something such as this, to be sitting on top of the world, addressing Nepal, all of my colleagues, my friends across the world, and thank you. So I'm a wildlife biologist. I've been doing this actually for decades. I've been a professor for decades. I've been studying wild animals in wild places around the world, across many continents. And I'm old enough to have observed a lot of change. And what I'd like to do in this brief presentation is tie these various changes together. Of course, one of the things that I've noticed over the past 35 years of studying wild animals in wild places, things are getting hotter. The other thing that I've noticed over the years is that habitat and good landscapes for both animal species and humans are shrinking. The other thing that I've noticed over the years, and all of this I've been recording as well as a scientist, is that the conflict between humans and the animals with which they share landscapes is increasing. All of these things are tied together, and I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes trying to describe that. So I'm pulling together three themes, right? So habitat loss, climate, and human-wildlife conflict. I'm going to start with human-wildlife conflict. What is that? So human-wildlife conflict is a situation when there's any interaction between humans and animals that's negative. It's either negative for the animal species or negative to the animal species or both. Now, of course, these negative interactions can be mild, but they can also be extreme. They can be extreme in the form of the loss of crops. They can be extreme in the form of the loss of lives. Human-wildlife conflict occurs with insects, and this is what we've been seeing around the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa where I work, is that changes in climate has made things very favorable for insects such as locusts that can create extreme hardship for those who are growing crops, because they come in and they can wipe out crops in just a couple of days. This is a climate effect on human-wildlife conflict that doesn't get us perhaps as much attention as it should, but it's happening nonetheless. So we've got all kinds of conflict that's going on out there. Perhaps the most dramatic conflictual relationships between animals and humans is between humans and predators and humans with large-bodied animals such as elephants. So for example, in Nepal and in India, each year hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people, die from elephants and from leopards, right? So predators and large-bodied animals. Now, you wouldn't think about it on top of it, but these are actually side effects of climate change and side effects of habitat loss. And I'll try to tie that together. So what happened as I unfold this? So I'm going to be talking about animals, and Dr. Berger did as well, not because, they're just something that we all like, but of course, but they are also critical aspects of our healthy ecosystems. We absolutely need animals to exist on a healthy planet Earth. We need animals to do things like pollinate our plants that we eat. We need animals to do things like disperse seeds. We need animals to maintain healthy populations of prey species. Right? So it's not just a cosmetic thing that we're talking about, but it's actually a discussion about healthy ecosystems in general. So human-wildlife conflict is a very real thing that's affecting people around the world. And I want to tie this a bit to climate change. Now, of course, climate has been changing throughout the course of planet Earth. One of the most well-recorded times of climate change on this planet was at a point known as the Paleocene-Eocene boundary. Roughly 55 million years ago, there was a great warming trend. In fact, there was massive climate change when these very mountains were created. The Himalayas themselves were created, say, between 15 and 20 million years ago as the subcontinent of India crashed into the rest of Asia. And then those two great continental plates created these very mountains. These mountains have been forming. They continue to form. There was a great thrust of these mountains even 10,000 years ago. And associated with that was a great climate change. But what we're talking about today, and I think everybody in the audience and my colleagues here today know fully well, is that the climate change that is occurring today is very different. And it's different in two very important regards. One, the rate at which it's occurring, right? Much, much more rapid than any other so-called geologically induced climate change that's happened on this planet. It's much more rapid. Really, we start seeing the effects sometime around the Industrial Revolution, say 150 to 200 years ago, and then really ramping up, especially in about the 1950s. So this is a very recent thing, and it's also human-induced. There's never before in all of our Earth's history when the fate of Mother Earth, the fate of our planet, is up to a single species that is both creating the circumstances that we're living through today and also holds the solutions. So climate change itself is caused, we can talk about this further in the panel discussion. It's caused by, of course, the combustion of fossil fuels, which releases untold numbers of gases, particularly in the form of CO2. So the CO2 is released, and these gases are released. They are able to permeate. They are transparent to, they are able to sort of hover in the atmosphere, and ultraviolet radiation is able to come through this fairly transparent gas layer and then heats up the surface of planet Earth. And then in turn, as planet Earth is heating up, that infrared radiation is emitted out of the planet and then heating up in those gases, and hence called greenhouse gases. And so what this is doing is causing, as Dr. Berger indicated, is just sort of devastation around the world. The effects are particularly felt in the Arctic, mostly it's felt around the world, but they are particularly felt in the very vast, most high latitude regions of the northern hemisphere, to a lesser degree in the very high latitudes of the southern hemisphere, and then also in mountainous regions, very high mountainous glacial regions, such as what we are sitting in today in the Himalaya regions. And so around the world, we're seeing the effects of this climate change in the form, of course, devastating floods, droughts, wildfires, right? Sea level rises. Untold amounts of climate change are occurring. Now, this has consequences not only for just the what we call abiotic world, but also the biotic world, because what is happening as the world is changing as a consequence of climate is that habitat is shrinking. And what this means is that the habitat, the good, healthy habitat that both animals and humans are using, is getting smaller and smaller. And it's bringing into conflict those animals and the humans that live in those areas. And so, for example, as an example, the horrible droughts of 1986 and 1988 in India, which was caused by a so-called El Nino effect, which is a consequence of climate change, resulted in a huge percentage increase increase in elephants' crop raiding because they couldn't find their own natural resources. As elephants are coming into areas where humans are living, humans are trying to defend their crops, and we get this conflictual situation of elephants losing their lives because of retaliation and humans losing their lives because elephants are preying on their crops. At the same time that we had elephants during this time increasing in conflictual interactions, at the same time in India we had 600% increase in lion attacks on humans. And this is because the natural prey of lions were hit very, very hard by the drought. Lions don't have their own natural prey to eat, and then they are brought into village areas where there's water and available and other resources that they're taking part of. So these kinds of effects, drought-related, are particularly problematic. For example, in my own country, in Colorado, we've had devastating wildfires, which has resulted in increasing numbers of black bears coming into even my very own backyard, and conflict taking place that way. One of the most well-recorded interactions tying climate change into human-wildlife conflict has occurred in the Himalaya region itself. It's something that Dr. Berger mentioned in passing, and that is the relationship between climate and snow leopard behavior, and what happens to snow leopards when their prey, their natural prey in the form of blue sheep, are hit. So as things get warmer, as things get drier in this region, prey species such as blue sheep are at a disadvantage. They're eating the plants that are heavily impacted by a drier climate. And as they are seeking out different resources, they're increasingly coming into areas where there are humans and where those humans are irrigating because of their crops. So they're coming in for crops, they're coming in for irrigated areas where they can eat the plants because of the human effect of water, and then those snow leopards are coming in to take those prey, and those snow leopards coming into those areas are then met with perhaps even easier targets in the form of domesticated animals, domesticated livestock. So they're taking livestock. People then are at an extreme disadvantage because they've lost then perhaps their crops because of the blue sheep, then they're losing their livestock because of the leopards, and then there's retaliation in the killing of those snow leopards, which then influences snow leopard population decline itself. So it's all of these things are tied together in inextricable ways. So there's good news in all of this. First of all, I'd like to highlight this very summit. Around the world, there is an awareness. Again, I'm old enough to have observed the whole change in increasing, slowly by slowly, increasing awareness, increasing consciousness of our planet. We hear about climate change. We hear about global warming all of the time. Just a few years ago, people weren't talking about this, and now we have governments that are putting together forward-thinking policies, right, and to cope with the devastating effects, not just in a reactive way, but in a proactive way as well. We've got a change occurring at both the level of grassroots and consciousness of people, and then at the governmental level, we can come up with an understanding of climate, with an understanding of animal behavior. We can come up with what we might call kind of adaptive, anticipatory policies. So, for example, livestock depredation, reimbursing people for the loss of their livestock, right? In the case of, say, a snow leopard taking a livestock, can be, a very useful way of dealing with that is to give the livestock owner actual funds to compensate for the loss of that animal. If we come up with sort of anticipatory, if we know something about the climate models, if we know that there's going to be a year that's drier than others, right, we might actually kind of think about increasing revenue for things like livestock depredation in those years, right? So we can be adaptive using climate models, using our knowledge of animal behavior in thinking about solving some of the problems. I also just want to end on a word of hope. We've all been through, in the last couple of years, perhaps one of the most darkest times in recent histories. We've gone through a global pandemic, right, that touched every single life, human life, on this planet in one way or another, and some populations more than others. I think this brought about an awareness, right? It brought about an awareness that our relationship with animals is much closer than perhaps anybody had ever given a second thought to. That was a zoonosis. That was a virus that jumped from one animal species into our own animals, into our own population. I think that what that has done is given us a very, very visceral, very, very emotional awareness of just how intimate our relationship is with wild animals. And that those wild animals, in turn, are being shaped by the very processes that we are doing to our earth. The other thing that it did is that it showed, if you think about it, one of the things that governments, that people say all the time is, what can I do? What can I do to help with climate change, right? Is there really anything that any individual human can do? Is there really anything that any government can do? This will take decades to change. In fact, what we saw during the pandemic is that things can change overnight, almost literally, right? The people stopped driving their cars in lockdown. People stopped flying in airplanes. Industry closed down, and the atmosphere became healthier. For the first time in years, the Himalayas, and even at some points within Kathmandu, Mount Everest could be seen because the pollution, the CO2 gases, had reduced. And this happened in just a couple of months. Right? We can change our behavior, and we can make a difference, right, that can have effects in a very real way, in a very short-term way. We don't have to wait decades. And so I'll end on that point of hope, and I will leave it to our moderator to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joanna Lambert, for a wonderful, knowledgeable presentation. Thank you once again. Now, I would like to open for panel discussion. Sherpaji, would you like to say something about this climate change?
The world is changing day by day. People are just they just want facility. They just want a luxury lifestyle, but they don't want to think about after 10 years later world. I also very worried, and sometimes I think nowadays we can see here lots of rocks, and after 10 years later, what will happen here?
So I'd like to thank you for your comments and presentation. In my very brief discussion with you, you said that you've been doing this for a long time. And I know that Seven Summits is a very famous group across the world. I think the knowledge that you bring forth reaches politicians, reaches elected officials, and as you continue to move that up, maybe, just maybe, those officials will be realizing plastic bottles, plastic are everywhere. You certainly know that. You know the issues of moving waste products down the mountain and what that takes. And so I just want to congratulate you for what you're saying and bringing to all of us. Thank you.
Dexy, would you like to say something?
धन्यवाद शरणजी। म एउटा नेपाली भएको नाताले म मेरो नेपाली भाषा विश्वले सुनोस् भन्न चाहन्छु।
Sure.
यो मेरो क्वेसन डाक्टर बर्गरज्यूलाई। मेरो घरतिर पहिला डाँफे, मलेवा र जङ्गली मौरीहरू जाडो सिजनमा आउने गर्दथे र म त्यसलाई हेरेर रमाउने गर्थेँ र लाली गुराँसहरू पनि त्यो समयमा फुल्ने गर्थे। तर अहिले म ती सबै जीवहरू र लाली गुराँसहरू ती सबै जीवहरू आएको कहिले पनि देख्दिनँ र ती लाली गुराँसहरू फुल्नुपर्ने समयभन्दा 1 महिना 1.5 महिना अगाडि नै फुलेको पनि देख्छु। यसको प्रमुख कारण के हुन सक्छ?
Thank you, Dr. Bahadur, for the question. I appreciate it. So I'm going to try to answer it for the plants and then for the animals. So for the plants, we know in many regions of the world, flowering, blooming, pollination, fertilization has changed because either the timing of precipitation or the temperatures have been altered. And so that causes a chain reaction. And so the timing at which the different plants are receptive to be fertilized is altered. In many places of the world, greening of plants has gotten earlier, but in some places it may be later, such as what you may have said or indicated. Your second question, the question about the animals that used to be there and aren't there anymore, I need to know more, and I'm smiling because I can't answer like with a big paintbrush across all of the different species and animals. And so, some possibilities could be there's more human disturbance. Some possibilities might be that the food that the animals need is no longer there, and we would have to know more then about the movements. Maybe the populations have changed, maybe disease such as what Dr. Lambert talked about in the case of COVID, but this would be different diseases, could be possibilities.
I think I heard about bees. Yes, so I can add to that. Add to everything that Dr. Berger said is absolutely the case. There's other effects that are going on as well, human-caused effects, that has resulted in a collapse of pollinating bees around the world. And in fact, we call it the great bee collapse, right? They're around the world, pollinating animals such as bees have gone almost extinct in some areas. And what we are coming to understand is a couple of things. One is that what do we call them? The herbicides, the toxic pesticides that we put on our crops to manage weeds is killing those bees. So bees are absolutely critical for pollination, but bees are also being killed by humans who are using these pesticides, these toxins on their crops. The other thing, and this is a climate-related effect, is that there is a kind of fungus, a kind of disease that animals like bees who live in colonies are catching. And it is causing entire colonies of honeybees to collapse. And we know that in warmer areas, in warmer seasons, that disease, that kind of fungus is more prevalent. So it's the timing of the flowers that are available for the bees. It is the toxins from pesticide, and then also diseases on the animals themselves.
Dulabji, would you like to say something?
According to your presentation, I'm thinking some questions myself. I would like to ask this question to the both of you, Dr. Lambert and Dr. Berger. You are from the great nation of America, and you do have lots of industry around the country. So, my question is, what is the plan of the government of America about the global warming? And what is your suggestions to those largest countries to stop climate change? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. It's a great question. You are right about America and its industries. We have maybe 5% of the world's population, and we contribute maybe 25% of the pollution. We used to generate 30%. It's not that we have reduced it, it's that the world population has come up and are looking also for standards that would make for better living. That's not an answer to your question, so I'll try to answer your question. Governments should be responsive to the people. In the U.S., our governments are never perfect. Sometimes they're stronger about environmental issues, sometimes they're weaker. Our current institutional programs are very strong on climate, but we also have problems about moving things forward. We are trying as a country to lead with electrical and with solar power. But there are many lessons Americans can learn from other countries who do better than we do. We cannot be arrogant. We have to listen and learn from others, and we're trying, but we're not quite there. I'm going to hand it to Dr. Lambert to offer her insights on this.
Am I on? Yeah, thank you for that excellent question, and it gets to the heart of the matter, right? It is without a doubt that those individuals and those nations that have done the least to contribute to the problems that we have today are those individuals and those nations that are suffering the most. Right? And this isn't happening just today. The issue is that this is the past couple hundreds of years, right? There are many scholars, many scientists, many politicians that are working towards a solution. I can reassure you of that. Every few years, there are what we call intergovernmental panels that assemble, that comprise scientists from around the world, from countries, including politicians and including leaders, that meet for several weeks at a time. And what they are doing in very, very difficult conversations, say scientists from Nepal, scientists from the United States, leaders from Nepal, leaders from the United States are in rooms, in chambers, sitting at tables like this, talking about these things. What are we going to do? How are you, United States, who has contributed so much, how will you, Western nations, England, Germany, etc., how are you going to pay for what you have done? How are you going to claim responsibility for the issues that are occurring now? And there are multiple. So what happens are these very difficult conversations, and literally there are various sort of solutions that are proposed. Right? One of them is that industrialized nations like the United States, like Great Britain, like Germany, pay more for cleaning up the issues that we have today, that pay countries like Nepal, like nations in sub-Saharan Africa for the issues, that give up some of our wealth to help offset the issues that are going on in those countries. Right? And then questions come up like, okay, well, how much will we pay? Right? So these are points of negotiation, and these are going on. So at these summits that take place that are intergovernmental, these global summits, the scientists will present, and then the leaders get together, and it'll be presidents, and then they sometimes come to agreements, sometimes they don't. Right? Sometimes they walk away. and there aren't agreements. There was a great agreement that took place in 2015 in Paris. It was unanimous. It was unanimous across all of the countries that were represented there. And what was unanimously agreed upon is that we have to come up with a way as a nation, as a planet, to limit the emission of greenhouse gases such that by the end of the century, such that the planet doesn't get any hotter than 2 degrees Celsius relative to where it was about 150 years ago. So at least we agreed upon that, right? Scientists today agree upon making sure that we have reduced total fossil fuel emissions by half by 2030. That date is coming up very fast. But these are the sorts of things that get discussed at these global summits. And you are absolutely right. The question of environmental justice and the question of industrialized nations paying for what has happened. We've reaped all the benefits and we've caused all the problems. So what are we going to do about it now? And you can rest assured there are many that are working towards environmental justice. And that the fact remains is that the most industrial nations on the planet are those nations that have reaped the benefits, but that have also caused the devastation, and that they need to pay in some way. And we're just trying now as nations. There are multiple ways of doing this, right? And at that governmental level, it really is about leaders talking to leaders.
Thank you, Dr. Joanna. I would like to raise some questions for you both. I have written some questions on my paper. You both are professors at major universities and teach many young students. What messages do you give these young people? What do you teach them about the state of the world?
Thank you for that question. As we know, the hope lies in our young people. I teach many students at my university. I spend a lot of time with them. I take them into the field even and teach them how to do field research. And as a consequence, I know young people well, that age bracket between, say, 18 years and like 22 years. And what I know is that they carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. They know, they look around, they see that people my age are scared. They see that people my age are sad about what we have lost. They are aware of that. What I do, and I do spend a lot of time teaching, I do absolutely everything I can to inspire optimism and to inspire hope. And what I say is that pessimism paralyzes. If we think that everything is going to end, what do? We give up, right? If we think about optimism, that catalyzes, that makes us want to help. And so what I literally teach my students at universities is that every day they need to meditate on hope and meditate on the positive stories and think about those. Because if they don't think about the good things that we have accomplished as a species, they're going to give up. And anything that we can do in my generation and Dr. Berger's generation to inspire hope and to inspire positive thinking, I think is my message.
Thanks for the question, and Professor Lambert, thanks for sharing your perspective on your many years of devoted teaching. I agree with Dr. Lambert that the hope is really with the next generation, our youth. Our youth hold the future. What we've done around the world is, I think, instill values in youth, independent of cultural identity. Lessons, values, knowledge, and wisdom is handed down. One of the things in the world as we now exist that seems important, so important, is voting. And if we can tell 4 students or 4 people to reach out to 4 more, that would be 16. To reach out, and that would make 64. To reach out, we would be at 256. To reach out, we would be at maybe 1,600, 1,400. I'm not good at math in my mind when I'm on film. But to continue to do that, we can take a country like Russia that has raised issues about climate in their universities, and their government, irrespective of the politics, are aware of climate change and the issues that face not only their country, but all countries. And so I think having our youth being able to work with their parents, to ask their parents, what are the changes? To ask their parents, are they comfortable with what the world is now? To ask, what would you like the world to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now? How do we get there? Are we satisfied with the status quo, or do we move ahead? And I think that comes whether you're in college, whether you're in a technical school, even if you're not in a high school and you don't have the advantages for a high school.
These days, people are treating nature as commodity. What do you say that? Is it good to treat nature as commodity or not?
So across time, humans have, of course, treated nature as a commodity. You look at the domesticated animals that we have. You look at the food that we have that comes mostly from domesticated plants. We always have treated nature as a commodity. With some 8 billion people on the planet, if we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves. We already see that we've polluted the waters. We see that we've warmed the oceans. We see species are changing their distributions. We know that the climate is changing. All of these are consequences of how we treat nature. Whether we're looking for fossil fuels, irrespective of what countries we're doing that in, we continue to treat nature as a commodity. We have small postage stamps of places where we say, let nature run its course. Chitwan is an example. We can, look at other great national parks, Serengeti, but those are postage stamps. Areas outside these national parks have mixed use. If we have wise mixed use, we will continue to sustain healthier ecosystems, which will be healthier for humans. If we treat nature just as a commodity, without respect, without it in our hearts, in our cultural identities, we will continue to destroy the planet. There is hope. I like how Dr. Lambert ended one of her comments about hope. And certainly we see that there's much greater recognition about treating nature with respect. And that will make a big difference with decisions made for compromise. Not all nature can be conserved. Not all nature should be conserved. We need to find some balances. But that's always the issue, whether we're dealing with International Panel on Climate or other biodiversity panels. It's that challenge that is, it's that compromise that is the challenge.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like to add to that, and thank you for the question, and thank you for that response. Absolutely. I'd like to sort of define the term commodity a little bit, because of course we could sell things, right? We could sell coltan, we could sell coal, we could sell timber, right? So that's one way of being a commodity, right? Yeah. And we've seen what that's done. But we can also sell experiences. And I think that is a way of instilling value. If people haven't ever seen a mountain, if people have never seen a glacier, if people have never seen a mountain gorilla, how can they know how valuable they are? And so some of the most successful conservation programs around the world have been related to ecotourism. Exactly. And I think that ecotourism here in Nepal is phenomenally important. You have something to show the world and to instill value. There would be no mountain gorillas left if it weren't for the selling of an ecotourist experience of watching and observing mountain gorillas in their natural habitat. And indeed, ecotourism is the number one source of revenue for the nation of Rwanda in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a matter of defining that term commodity, because I think that selling this experience can do wonders.
Next question. Climate is changing, human populations are growing. Is it really possible for humans, wildlife to live in coexistence?
Yes. Can humans and wildlife live in coexistence? Yes. And in fact, we are living in coexistence. Just look around, right? Even here, I love, as all of this team knows already, I love watching birds. And there are birds all around here taking advantage of things like the waste that humans are producing here, right? There are butterflies that are coming in that are taking advantage of the flowers that are growing here because humans have dumped out their water from their Nalgene bottles. And so, yes, clearly there are areas of conflict, and I talked about that in my talk, and we need to work towards solutions towards that. But there are also examples, even from my country, of coexistence of humans and large-bodied predators like grizzly bear, like wolves, like coyotes, living in conflict. If humans do their part and figure out how to protect their livestock, how to protect their crops from incoming animals, then that's working towards a solution of coexistence.
When I think of the Central Highlands of Asia, when I think about humans in rural areas, I think about goat herders who use goats to produce cashmere, which is very valued in the Western and developed worlds. I think about some of the degradation of the rangelands in parts of northwest India, in Tibet, which is recognized certainly in Mongolia, which is recognized by the governments. If in fact we continue to produce so much livestock, there is no room left for wildlife. But at some point, and this is already clearly happening in different areas, the productivity for the domestic animals goes down because they've overgrazed. And so getting to your question, if in fact people have opportunities to change their economies, then some of the wild species will continue to exist in those areas and not fall into competition. And so thinking through how we minimize or change these systems, it's through education. Again, some lessons handed down, but it's got to be at a global level and a global scale.
Thank you. Both of you are specialized in animals, right? What animals are most affected by climate change?
So the animals most affected by climate change are those that are cold adapted, that live in the shadows of glaciers, that live at the highest latitudes, species like polar bears, species that are related to a species called muskoxen, which are long, and they used to roam with woolly mammoths. Woolly mammoths died out in part because of climate change, maybe exclusively, but now we have other cold adapted species. Blue sheep don't come down to very low elevations because they're cold adapted. Siberian ibex are from Mongolia north, and they're cold adapted. If we look across the entire realm of species, it's those that have to live in the cold. A great example would be yaks, but wild yaks. They used to occur in Russia, they used to occur in Mongolia, they used to occur in Western China. As things have gotten warmer in Mongolia, which is still a cold country, they lost all of their wild yaks. We have to go back a few thousand years. But as we see climate change warming temperatures to the north, all those species in the north that cannot adapt are the ones that we lose. Here in Nepal, I think of a couple of smaller species that some of you may know or not. A small rabbit-like species called pikas. They don't do well when it gets warm. I think about marmots, another cold-adapted species here in Nepal, and they don't do well. And so they're being lost at lower elevations because it's warmer.
May I add just a little bit? In addition to cold-adapted species, just tying back to some of the lessons from what I was presenting, actually, human-wildlife conflict is a major source of decline of many animal species. In sub-Saharan Africa, African elephants their population has dipped below 250,000. The number one cause, it's thought, of the decline of elephants in sub-Saharan Africa is conflict and being killed by humans. The reason why they're being killed by humans is because elephants are losing their habitat to climate change. So habitat is shrinking from climate. Elephants don't have anywhere to go. They go where the humans are. Humans kill them, and populations plummet. So it's a very, very complex cycle. In addition to cold-adapted species, and humans killing animals is another major cause.
Thank you. Do you think that events such as this one today can make a difference?
I'd be happy to take a stab at that. So when we think about individuals, we think about governments, and we think about solutions. They fall somewhere in between. What does an individual do? What do 1,000, what do 1,000,000 individuals do? What does a government do? I think about a young Swedish woman named Greta Thunberg, and she has energized young people all over the world, and she points fingers and suggests that governments are not doing enough, and she has a lot of publicity, and that is good. That's good. We need people to stick the fingers in the chest of government and say, do better. I think about something like this: grown, conceptualized, handed off here in Nepal by Nepalese. I love it. I think about Greta, who is young. Joanna is in the middle of an excellent career. I'm just an old guy, but old guys...
You're still young. Age are just a number.
There's a counterbalance here. You have the young Gretas of the world. You have old professors of the world who are still motivated, who won't quit, who will just continue to be in the face. Something like what you've done here, if it can be communicated and it catches on and catches fire, these kinds of things, especially the effort that the people here have gone to at almost 18,000 feet, 5,500 meters, the world's highest address on climate and wildlife. I think that these kinds of things will catch on and continue to make a difference. When we met last week with the Honorable Vice President Poon, he also was enthused about this. Having leaders who like the science but understand the needs of the common people, that is what we want. That is what we need.
Exactly. And you?
Yes, in answer to your question, I think summits like this, and I think individuals like all of you can make a difference.
We used to have the summit in the mountains because climate change is affecting high elevations. Can you tell us more about the difference directly on animals?
Okay, thanks. High elevation species all around the world are being affected greatly, whether it's people living high in the Andes, whether it's people high in the Himalayas, whether it's people, what other continents have high elevation? Okay, mostly the Andes and Himalayas. Other countries have lower elevations. It's affecting people, it's affecting animals. My favorite example would be the wild yaks. I mentioned them briefly, but I'll say a little bit more about them. So wild yaks are just colonizing, coming back into Nepal. That's part of the reason why they're on the rupee, with some of the great photographs that we're taking in northwestern Nepal. Over just 2 kilometers from here is Tibet, and then further west in Tibet, there are still wild yaks. Mothers must produce milk for their babies, as in all mammals. We all know that. The challenge has been that in the middle of winter, when it can be minus 20 centigrade, the young calves of yaks, wild yaks, are still nursing their mothers. Where do the mothers produce water for milk? The rivers are frozen solid, so they can't access that. They can. You have to break the ice, but they can't break the ice. So they have to find snow. We know that snow is declining in these areas, and especially snow patches are declining. That's where the mothers go. So as the snow is sublimated by wind, by insulation, by albedo effects, they can't use those habitats. Hundreds and thousands of kilometers are gone that they can't access because the snow is not there anymore. So they have a challenge. Blue sheep have a challenge because just like the question that you asked earlier, Dr. Bahadur, on the development timing of plants. So blue sheep have problems now because the timing and access to plants is less available. So they have to change. In Bhutan, their national mammal is what's called a takin. Takin are having problems because of the timing of plants, but also coupled with human-related issues. So those are three different examples from this area of the world that are having challenges.
And I'll just say very, very briefly that climate change is differentially impacting different parts of the world. Some parts of the world are much more sensitive to the effects of a warming planet. As I mentioned earlier, high latitudes, so especially high latitudes of the Arctic, and now we know of Antarctic as well, are particularly vulnerable, and also high altitudes. So any animal species that is specialized to those habitats are particularly vulnerable.
Thank you. Anyways, the climate is changing. The globe is becoming more warmer than yesterday. What is the solution? How can we stop on our behaviors, on our nature? How can we stop the global warming? We want solution.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Man, you're asking a huge question, right? There are literally thousands of scientists right now trying to figure that out. And I think the answer is it has to start from within. So the first part is to increase consciousness and to increase an awareness of what is going on. And that's what this summit is all about, right? So increasing consciousness, I think, as I've mentioned previously, kind of meditating on the fact that there is hope and that we have seen change. The beauty thing about humans and their behavior is the behavior can change, and behavior can change very, very quickly. And we saw that recently with our global pandemic, right? That within weeks, our entire planet changed because everything just stopped. So I think that what that demonstrated is just how quickly things can change if we make the decision to stop producing emissions from fossil fuels. I think that is clearly the number one thing that we can do after we've changed an awareness, a consciousness, and a maximizing.
We have almost finished the panel discussion. Thank you, all the participants. We have very good question answer on this panel discussions. And now I would like to hand over this mic to Purna Rai for further program.
I would like to say thank you so much, Shanon sir, a really gentleman, diplomatic person. Thank you so much, Professor, Doctor, and Senior Environmental Honorable Scientist Joel Berger. Similarly, Professor, Doctor, and Senior Environmental Honorable Scientist Joanna Didi. Thank you so much, all the team. You have done hard work. It's a long time we spent here, but it was not only spending the time here. We have a voice for the world. We have a voice for the human being, for everything. This is not for individual. We have done for over the world. This is my trust. Before I leave, end of my words, of course, I would like to hand over this mic to the president of this program, Mr. Bahadur Rai. Please, thank you all.
धन्यवाद पूर्ण राई, यो अर्गनाइजेसनको सचिव। सबभन्दा पहिला विश्वको सर्वोच्च शिखर सगरमाथाको आधार शिविरबाट सबैलाई नमस्कार टक्राउन चाहन्छु। हामी अहिले विश्वको सर्वोच्च शिखर सगरमाथाको आधार शिविर जो 5364 मिटरको उचाइबाट विश्व समुदायलाई एउटा सन्देश प्रवाह गरिरहेका छौँ र हामी यो कार्यक्रमको अन्त्यतिर लगभग आइसकेको छौँ। हामीलाई थाहा छ अहिले विश्वव्यापी रूपमा यो जलवायु परिवर्तनले पारिरहेको असर यो एउटा क्षेत्र मात्रै नभएर विभिन्न क्षेत्रहरूमा वनस्पति, वन जङ्गल, मानव लगायतका चाहिँ विभिन्न क्षेत्रहरूमा यसको तीव्र गतिमा असर परिरहेको छ र त्यसमध्ये पनि सबभन्दा बढी चाहिँ यो जलवायु परिवर्तनले उच्च हिमाली भागहरूलाई चाहिँ बढी असर पर्ने देखिएको छ। त्यो वैज्ञानिक तथ्यहरूले चाहिँ त्यो पुष्टि गरेको छ र नेपाल एउटा हिमालको देश भएको हुनाले त्यसको असर सबभन्दा बढी हाम्रो हिमालहरूमा परेको पनि हामीले सुन्नमा पाएका छौँ। हामी अहिले जहाँनिर कार्यक्रममा भाग लिइरहेका छौँ, हामी जहाँनिर बसिरहेका छौँ, यो बेस क्याम्पमा यो आधार शिविर कुनै पनि विज्ञहरूले तथ्य प्रस्तुत गरेको छ कि यो 5 वर्षभित्र यो बेस क्याम्प एउटा तालमा परिणत हुँदैछ। हामी पनि कल्पना गर्न सक्छौँ, किनभने 5-10 वर्षको बिचमा मैले पनि धेरै अनुभवहरू, धेरै परिवर्तनहरू देखेँ र 15-20 वर्षपछि यो हिमालका सबै हिमहरू सिद्धिन्छ भन्ने प्रक्षेपणहरू पनि आइराखेको छ। त्यसो हुँदाखेरि हाम्रो हिमालहरू अब रितिने अवस्थामा छ, सिद्धिने अवस्थामा छ। त्यसो त अहिलेसम्म हिमालको देश भनेर चिनिएको, विश्वको छाना भनेर चाहिँ चिनिएको सगरमाथा अहिले जबकि एउटा चट्टानमा परिणत हुँदैछ, यो हाम्रो एउटा चिन्ताको विषय छ। सगरमाथा हाम्रो एउटा गर्व हो, यो हाम्रो एउटा चाहिँ पहिचान हो। यी हाम्रा गर्व गर्न लायक हिमालहरू अथवा हाम्रा चाहिँ पहिचानहरू रीतिले गर्दा स्वाभाविक रूपमा हामीलाई चासो र चिन्ता बढेको छ। त्यसैले हामीले विश्वकै सबभन्दा अग्लो ठाउँबाट विश्व समुदायलाई एउटा म्यासेज प्रवाह गरौँ भन्ने उद्देश्यले हामीले यो कार्यक्रम आयोजना गरेको हौँ। त्यसै गरी यो हामीले दिन खोजेको म्यासेजलाई विश्व समुदायसम्म पुर्याउनको निम्ति महत्त्वपूर्ण भूमिका खेल्नुहुने हाम्रा मिडिया पार्टनर्सहरू हुनुहुन्छ, उहाँहरूलाई पनि एकदम धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिँदै सम्पूर्ण हाम्रा सहयोगी दाताहरू, सहयोगी सङ्घ संस्थाहरूलाई हामी हार्दिक धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छौँ। धन्यवाद।